Welcome to the Wake Up Protocol. I am your host, Nadia Haldeman, and together we're having life-changing conversations with real people about spiritual awakening and the transformations that follow. We're mapping the messy path of awakening so you can go further faster and feel a little less alone along the way. For this episode of the Wake Up Protocol, I'm joined by Blake Chalfant, writer, coach, podcaster, and deeply reflective human devoted to understanding how we lose and reclaim purpose, creativity, and connection to ourselves. Blake stepped away from a conventional path early in life and began questioning how we abandon what matters most. His awakening unfolded as a long apprenticeship with resistance, habit, and attention, revealing that awakening doesn't end with awareness. It asks for integration, discipline, and devotion to what you're here to build. Together, we explore awakening through magic mushrooms, courageous leaps, and the hidden cost of living out of alignment. Because as Blake shares, it's a full-time job to pretend to be someone you're not. We talk about attention as our most precious resource, stepping into our true calling as a response to our time, and why awakening is never just personal. Drawing from the Buddhist lineage he practices, Blake reminds us that the work is always to awaken for the benefit of all. Our conversation also touches on spirituality and business and why people with heart, integrity, and compassion need to step into the arenas that shape the world. Because if they don't, somebody else will.
I did do a 180, the pendulum swing into the far other opposite end, but now it's come back. I feel like I'm recovering the baby out with the bathwater, where I've gotten so much from this time of learning who I am and what I want to do and of connecting to my vision. But for me, and what I see in a lot of spiritual people, is there's this lack of grounding the vision into venture, of taking the concrete, actionable steps. And I am such a believer in heart-centered people with a lot of integrity and intention, daring to enter the business world again. Because if not them, then who? The only people left in the game of business and capitalism, which, like it or not, is the arena of our world right now. If people like us are not daring to play the business game, then all it does is leave the people who are probably the bad examples that we ran from in the first place. Mm-hmm. They're the ones with the controllers in their hands. And it's a triggering topic for a lot of people in the spiritual community. Like, they don't want to do that. And many people say capitalism's wrong, business, money, coaching, it's wrong. And so I've really made that shift for myself and just am very passionate about recovering the baby out from the bathwater and seeing that it's not about the game, it's about the player of the game. And I want to recruit as many beautiful players as I can.
Blake Chalfant, welcome to the Wake Up Protocol.
Thank you for having me.
It is such a pleasure to finally have this conversation. You and I have been talking about you being on this podcast for a while, and your journey has been so fascinating. You're in the East Coast of the United States right now, but you spent the last 6 months in Costa Rica, and you're planning to go back there. And when you and I first met back in 2021, you were a very different person than you are today. We met at a beautiful gathering with amazing human beings, and there's just such a massive shift, a 180 from who you were to who you are today. But before we get into that, I'm really curious, what's feeling alive for you today?
What's feeling alive for me today is the idea that pretty much anyone that you recognize as having done something great, or the greats of our time that are remembered, or people who inspire you in some way, the large majority of them, for whatever it was that they were doing, working on, they had to try many, many, many times. And so I am in this moment of trying in many ways in my own life, whether it's trying to grow an Instagram audience, or, I write a weekly newsletter, or I'm creating an online community right now and trying to build that. So there's just many things that I'm tending to in my life. And it's easy. I think it's just a very human thing to get caught up in how the world receives it, because you put a lot of energy into something, you believe in it, you know the value that's there. And so on some level, even if you're trying not to, I think for all of us, there is a little bit of like, okay, maybe the world's going to respond really well. Maybe this is going to be the one that really helps everything take off. And it doesn't, many times, over and over. And, I've been writing a weekly newsletter for like 2 years now, and I just scroll down the list and it's 0 likes, 0 likes, 0 likes. And so the idea and what's really alive for me is, can we take the frame when we're looking at the 0 likes, when life doesn't respond to us in the way that we were expecting it to? Can we hold the frame that these are actually the stories that we will one day tell? That these are not failures. These are actually stories. Can you imagine yourself on the stage in your community, whatever it is, when everyone's asking you, how'd you do that? How'd you become that? How'd you cultivate that? And you're getting to reflect back on the exact moment that you're in right now, where a part of you wants to call it a failure and give up and say, I'm done. Those are those moments. These are the golden years. And for me, holding that frame is so incredibly generative that this is a story. You're collecting these stories, and it really shifts everything for me. So that's what's alive.
I love that perspective, because every single person who ever got to a place somehow had to start at ground zero and somehow build themselves up to that place. And so looking back, it's like, yeah, these were the steps that I took to get there. And rather than getting defeated by that, to use that as opportunities for future stories to share with others, and to also encourage people to keep going and work towards that calling. And you actually called yourself a calling coach. Can you tell us a little bit more about what that is? Do you help people find their calling, or what is it that you do?
Yeah, thank you for asking this question. And literally, I think this is as of the past 3 days, this is what I'm calling myself. And I haven't so explicitly called myself until you asked me, what kind of coach do you call yourself? So I do a lot of stuff with people. I help them a lot with behavior change, and I have some background in like somatic therapy. And so every session's so different. And I think what I've really been keying in on recently is this idea of calling. And people have different words for that. Some would call it the soul, some would call it your genius, some would call it your dharma. But for whatever reason, the word calling just holds such a precious place for me internally, the idea of the calling that we each have. And it's just something that I've stumbled into that I'm naturally really good at. I see people's potential really, really easily. And it's the greatest joy in my life to help that flourish and come online. And something that I'm so passionate about, that we've been so divorced within our culture around this idea of calling, that there is an essential nature within each of us that is wanting to unfurl into something that gives us the feeling that for whatever reason, I know that this is what I'm here to do. And again, it doesn't have to be talking to millions of people. It doesn't have to be this big, glamorous, flashy thing. It can be taking care of your family and being a part of your community and having a garden. But for whatever reason, that is being in that pocket of experience is the thing that you feel most alive in, most in your pocket of existence, that this is me. And I think it's one of the most important things that humans can do and follow. Yeah. I don't know if that directly answered the question, but that's what comes up for me.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And yeah, when you said I'm a calling coach, it didn't quite roll off the tongue, but then I was like, calling. And now that you're talking about it, calling, obviously I've heard the term many times before. What's your calling? Which I also use as a synonym for what's your purpose. But when I think calling, it takes me back to a moment where I was at Burning Man, and there was a telephone booth in the middle of the playa, and you could call God. And you could go there and pick up the phone, old style phone booth, right? And somebody was on the other side and pretended to be God, and they would tell you beautiful things. And so to me, that calling, it's like somebody is calling you. It's from somewhere else. There's something bigger than yourself that wants to birth itself through you. And that calling, I'm getting goosebumps just as I'm saying that, that calling needs to birth itself through you. Or as Elizabeth Gilbert in Big Magic says, that genie, or genius, I think she calls it, that comes through you. And when you're not giving it birth, it needs to go through somebody else. So it's like, yeah, let's listen to that calling and then really start taking that inspired action towards those steps that we can bring that into the world. So when we go back to when I first met you, where were you in your journey of finding your calling?
So when we first met each other at that weekend retreat, my calling was very much still gestating. I didn't quite know what it was yet. And I would say right around that time was when I woke up to the deep curiosity and interest about helping people, like therapeutic, healing arts. And so that was the first initial seed. And so then at that point, I transferred schools and I ended up getting my degree in psychology. And I was also taking certifications in different healing arts. So that was step one. And at the same time also was when I started to learn music for the first time in my life. And I could feel that there was something so there, which is why I practiced it so much. So at that point, I think it was like, okay, this music thing and something with the healing arts, that was when it really woke up within me at that moment.
That's beautiful. So when you think about who you were before that, how would you describe yourself?
Before when we met?
Yeah. Because there's this really clear distinction in my mind of who you were when I first met you and then who you became when I met you again a few months later.
A few months later. It was probably more like 2 years later, I think.
2 years later.
Yeah. So there's a lot to say in there. I would say, to make a long story very short, I was a naive boy who was realizing that he had a lot of healing work to do, and also realizing the immense realms of reality that I just had no idea existed. And these ways of being that were possible, and these frequencies, for lack of a better term, that were available to human beings to touch, to feel. And so, yeah, I felt like a naive little boy. And I would say between then and the next time that I met you, there was more of like a maturation, more of a settling into this new way of being, going really deep into healing arts, transformational experiences, and settling deeper into my sense of calling, my sense of what I'm here to do, and exploring my gifts, things like this. But it was just a deeper rooting, I would say, a maturation.
And I would like to dig a little bit deeper into the whole healing concept. I've had conversations with people and they're like, stop talking about healing because that implies I am sick. And yet healing is this journey because we're growing, we're expanding. There's so much more to us than who we are at any given moment in time. And so how did you come to the realization that you needed to, quote unquote, go on this healing journey? That you even had that awareness?
The first time that I really realized this was during a mushroom experience. I had taken mushrooms before, but this was really the one, the one. And I was in college at the time, and I was total fraternity boy, freshman year, partying a ton, just completely drowning in this world of pop culture. And during this experience, me and one of my best friends who was in the same lifestyle as I was pretty much looked at each other for 5 hours straight, us two around a fire, and realized we really hated our lives and were completely disconnected from any sense of who we are. Everything that we were doing in our core, we were not down with. It wasn't fulfilling at all. And it really just felt like a massive fog had lifted. And I was like, oh my gosh, I hate my life. And that set in motion this very intense change in lifestyle. And literally the next day I applied to transfer schools, and I ended up dropping the fraternity. Then COVID happened, and I switched schools, and yada, yada, yada. But I think that was the first real glimpse of there's more here than I thought there was.
And it can be so disorienting too when you have that realization and you're realizing I'm living this one reality and I'm wanting to step into this other one, but not having any roadmap on how to get there. What was guiding you along to find those next steps and not just get completely disillusioned by that?
Yeah. Well, I think I had my best friend that was in the experience as well, who we were able to really validate each other's experience, and we took the same steps to a T. We both ended up transferring schools to the same school, was living together, went through the exact same next sort of metamorphosis. And so we had each other. I also think maybe it's just who I am and my capacity to integrate that experience and not, have a psychotic break or something like this because of it. I also have a very supportive family and parents that are able to speak this language and see me in that way. So I would also say that was extremely supportive. And it is definitely not to say that the transition was easy, because there's also kind of a next step where the next step was when I transferred schools. It's not like that was, okay, Blake all into the healing arts. Now he found himself. I went from party boy, fraternity boy to trying on the hippie costume. So just a different thing. And it felt like one step closer to who I was it still wasn't me. I was still like just obsessed with positivity when there was a whole realm of deeper emotion that I wasn't giving any space for. And I had a girlfriend that I wasn't able to speak my truth around, and I was still partying. And so it was one step closer, but I was still in this brain fog. And then I ended up moving out from Tennessee to Washington. And that was really when things began to change in a much deeper way.
Mm-hmm. So when you say things started to change, can you maybe go a little bit more into that? Like what exactly started to change for you?
Yeah, I think it was the first time that I truly was seeing clearly all of my inner work that I hadn't done, all the things that I hadn't been feeling and acknowledging. That first mushroom experience in college, I had the fog lift and I realized I didn't like my life, things like this, but it's not like I just was now really into my healing work after that. It was like enough of a wake up call for me to really shift the course of my life. But then it wasn't until my move from Tennessee to Washington when I got out there, because of the people that I was around and they were all very much into their own healing work. And so there was just this kind of interconnected shift on many levels between the people, the location. And as you know, sometimes I think when we say yes to life in these big leaps, there's just something that happens. There's like a momentum that happens. And so I broke up with my girlfriend. I quit my job on the East Coast. I dropped out of school. I had no plans, no work on the West Coast, no school opportunity. And I packed my car, and after pretty much a single phone call with a mutual friend, not knowing the people I was going out to live with, I packed my car and moved out west. So it was a massive yes for me, between me and life. And I think life rewards courageous leaps. And it was like through me saying yes, letting go of the stuff on the East Coast, that now all of a sudden, energetically, there was just a lot of space for a new breath of life to begin moving through me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, really having that courage. Life rewards courageous leaps. That's such a beautiful mantra to really remember, because it feels so scary at the time of doing it. And then looking back, it's like, yeah, of course I had to do this, and I'm so glad I did. And it's hard. And a little bit earlier, you talked about being positive in an extreme kind of way, while there was still that deeper work that needed to be done. And I'm curious if you could talk a little bit more to that as well, what that means.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a common thing that you probably have seen, and that I see a lot of people go through when they first kind of get turned on to spirituality, and then they get really into manifestation. And Joe Dispenza, that's who I was really into. It. People like this, there's so much there. There's so much goodness, so much beauty. And I think for me, I went so into that, where I was just like manifesting all these positive emotions in my future self. And there was such a lack of shadow work, of really going into these deeper depths and allowing space for the full spectrum of my being. And allowing for the deeper unfurlments of some of these, repressed trauma patterns and things like this. And so when I first got a taste of that, I was like, oh my gosh, where has this been? I was so missing that. And it's funny, actually, because I recently found my journal from that time period, from that exact year. And I'm reading this journal and I'm thinking to myself, this is the most boring thing in the world. I wish 20-year-old Blake would have written about more of like his honest truth. I wish he would have gone deeper into those moments where he was so upset and he was so lonely. And it's like he barely teases at it. And then it goes back to this, like, I'm positive, I'm okay. And it's just been interesting to reread that journal and really feel that. Like, yeah, he was really not feeling all the things back then.
Bypassing all of that.
Right.
So when you talk about shadow work, maybe not all of our listeners are familiar with that term. What is shadow work and how do people do that?
Yeah. So I'll speak to my understanding of it because I don't claim to be a Jungian specialist, but most people, when they think of shadow work, they think of the yucky, ugly, wounded places within ourselves that we have pushed away and that are in our shadow. So we don't see them. They are a part of us, but we don't see them. They have been repressed so far. And as soon as you acknowledge them or see them, you recognize it. It's no longer in your shadow. Like the definition of the shadow is like, you don't know it's there in a way. But I think the nuance with shadow work that's so important, that's been a really huge shift for me, is there's a lot of good stuff in your shadow as well. Like your shadow is also some of your deep gifts, some essential parts of your expression that maybe when you were younger, you were told that they're not welcome at the table. And so you pushed them away and said, there's no place for you here. So now they're in the shadow. So shadow work is integrating some of the mess and some of, the heavier stuff, but it's also reintegrating some of these really essential parts of who we are. I think that's a really important distinction for people.
Yeah. So some of the parts that might have gotten shoved away as children because we were shamed out of them or guilted and out of them. And then we shoved them away and starting to reintegrate those parts so we can become whole with all of our parts, not just the ones that at some point, because of conditioning, we thought were acceptable and that created that mask that we were walking around with.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it kind of feels like the before and after a spiritual awakening, there's like a version of us wearing a mask and then realizing the mask is really heavy and we can no longer carry it. And then taking it off is like, whoa, whew, that's what I look like. What's that even? Oh my God. And then getting to know yourself and love yourself for who you really are, not who you were conditioned to think you are.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a lot. It's a full-time job to pretend to be someone you're not. It's heavy.
So I know you've gone through a few different spiritual awakenings. It's obviously not a one and done experience. So you talked a little bit to the mushroom experience, magic mushrooms. Would you either want to go a little bit deeper there, or if you feel you've shared the important parts, going to another one to give us a bigger idea of what the steps were or the experiences were that got you to who you are today?
I think it'd be interesting to take it a bit further into the more recent time. I would say overall, though, I've just always been someone that's very good at saying yes to life. And I don't know where that comes from necessarily. Maybe it's my upbringing. I don't know.
What does it mean to say yes to life?
When you are being called to do something that is going to scare you or does scare you, saying yes. And so even if you don't think about it like life is speaking to me, in my opinion, when there is something that, and this is usually how it goes, initially, you're like, oh my gosh, that would be incredible. It feels so good. It feels so right in my body. And then it is followed by fear, doubt, all the reasons why you shouldn't do it. That's probably a really good sign that that's the thing that you should do. And so you mentioned how I just came off of living in Costa Rica for 6 months. Making that move, there was a moment, a couple of days where it's like, I know that this is my next step. I know that this is what I'm supposed to do. I know this is where I'm being called. And I made the decision, and you can bet there was loads of fear, loads of doubt, because logically it didn't make sense. Me going there was a leap, and I was going to have to figure some things out. Each step of the way was not perfect. It was not curated. There was a lot of unknown. That's a pretty big example of what I'm talking about. But for each of us, we are at a certain level of our leap. And once you take the leap that is currently on your plate, there's going to be a bigger leap. And there's going to be a bigger leap. Because through each leap, we are growing. We are expanding our capacity to dance with life, to show up into these environments that are scary, that are uncomfortable, that have a lot of unknown and uncertainty. But then through that, hopefully you're in this healthy stretch zone where it's not too much, but it's enough to where you're being stretched into someone new. When you come out of that, you are someone new. You have a bigger capacity to relate to life. And so the next leap is going to come and it is going to match where you are at now. And I just think it's this beautiful way, one way of seeing life. Like, and the leaps will never stop. And that's not the point of it. Like, thank God. Right.
Yeah. Thanks for explaining that. And so, yeah, I'd love to hear a little bit more about your most recent experience of awakening.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. It would maybe be a more minor awakening experience compared to the past ones, but I would say it's a very clear shift in my journey. Everyone's probably somewhat familiar with the hero's journey. I'm not going to explain every single step of it, but basically it's like you can think about the Lion King, like Simba growing up with his parents in Pride Rock, and it was a beautiful upbringing and a beautiful childhood. Everything was great. He was in the moment of naivete, and then Scar killed his dad, and Simba was shamed, and so then Simba was exiled. So there was this inciting event that forced him to leave, and that is kind of the general first spiritual awakening. Something happens that breaks the ordinary world and kind of forces you into what some people call like the wasteland, this in between after the spiritual awakening where things are challenging and you're trying to put yourself back together and you don't know who you are. And like, I think the wasteland is a great idea for that. And so for Simba, that's him going out. That's where he meets Timon and Pumbaa, Hakuna Matata. That's like, it's all one, let's go. And he meets Rafiki, and that's where he has these really profound experiences and things like this. And he sees the spirit of his dad. But his journey is not complete until he answers the call to go back to Pride Rock. And that's such an important piece. And that would be called the return. And we see this in different stories, but his return to Pride Rock to confront the exact thing that he actually ran from, which was Scar, and to reclaim his position. And so the reason that I'm sharing this story is because after I had that weekend where you and I met and I started healing arts and playing music, the next 4 years or so, 3-4 years, I went so far into the healing arts, transformational experiences, really exploring this question of what makes me alive and chasing meaning, because for 18 years of my life, meaning was never even mentioned. So I was like obsessed with meaning and purpose and following these threads of life. And that can be seen as my time with Pumbaa and Timon. That can be seen as my time with Rafiki. I was discovering myself. I was doing all this work. And I would say in the past year to year and a half, there was this really big shift within me that I can't necessarily point it to one specific moment in one specific day, but it felt like this next level of maturation. And a big part of that has been getting more serious about my business, getting more serious about my routine, getting more serious about these very human things. And for me, I kind of threw the baby out with the bathwater on some of this stuff, on capitalism, on money, things like this, because growing up after my spiritual awakening, I saw all of these people who only cared about money and trying to get their corporate job, and they all seemed pretty miserable. And that's all they cared about. So I think inevitably, and I think this is a common thing in spiritual awakenings, where we throw the baby out with the bathwater with many things. And so money's not good, whatever it is. I'm never going to watch TV again. Like, we go into this really extreme pendulum swing because it's like all of that is not good. So I'm going to start doing all of this. And so this experience that I'm sharing, kind of my version of the return this past year and a half or so, it's really been the pendulum swinging back. And I think this really important integration where I did do a 180, the pendulum swing into the far other opposite end, but now it's come back. I feel like I'm recovering the baby out with the bathwater, where I've gotten so much from this time of learning who I am and what I want to do and my meaning and everything, of connecting to my vision. But for me, and what I see in a lot of spiritual people, is there's this lack of grounding the vision into venture, of taking the concrete, actionable steps. And, you know, I am such a believer right now in heart-centered people with a lot of integrity and intention, daring to enter the business world again. Mm-hmm. Because if not them, then who? the only people left in the game of business and capitalism, which, like it or not, is the arena of our world right now. And I don't think the answer is run back into the woods and try and make a tribe or an eco village. It can be both. But if people like us are not daring to play the business game, then all it does is leave the people who are probably the bad examples that we ran from in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
Like they're the ones with the controllers in their hands. And so I think a part of my new flavor of calling and this sort of shift is like really wanting to speak to that. And it's a triggering topic for a lot of people in the spiritual community. Like they don't want to do that. And many people say capitalism's wrong, business, money, coaching, it's wrong, whatever. And social media, all of it. And so I've really made that shift for myself and just am very passionate about recovering the baby out from the bathwater and seeing that it's not about the game, it's about the player of the game. And I want to recruit as many beautiful players as I can.
Yeah, it's really interesting that you're mentioning this. I just had a conversation with somebody earlier about that. And the current paradigm we're in, and we're hopefully not going to be in this forever, but the current paradigm we're in, money is very important. It's a magic wand. It allows us to manifest the things we want to. And so depends what hands it's in, because if you make a lot of money, you can become a philanthropist and you have the ability to make massive change in the world, or you can be greedy and become a trillionaire and not share it with anyone and deplete all the resources. There's choices we can make. And so if you come in from a more awakened state and then have a different perspective on how to use that magic wand called money, then that's a beautiful thing. And maybe that is part of how we can usher in a new paradigm that allows us to have a more socially conscious structure underneath of all of that.
Mm-hmm.
Before we continue, I want to take a moment to say thank you for being here and for listening. Your support for this podcast means more than you can imagine. If this conversation is landing for you, I'd love to invite you to go a little deeper with us. You can sign up for the Wake Up Protocol newsletter at thewakeuprotocol.com. That's where we share tools, bonus insights, and discounts on upcoming offerings to help you integrate these conversations into your own life. And if someone comes to mind while you're listening, someone who needs to hear this message right now, please share this episode with them, or even 3 people who feel like they're standing at the edge of something big. This podcast grows through word of mouth, and your sharing truly helps this work reach the people it's meant for. Okay, let's return to the conversation. I know you're really interested in the current moment that we're in. What else do you see this current moment to be, and how can we really step into a more aligned version of ourselves, and how you call it, to become a soul-infused business person?
Yeah. Well, I'll try and build it up from the ground up, but I don't claim to have the solution for how to be a human on Earth right now. We all take up a different place within the grand ecosystem of what is the message we're sharing, what is the call to action that we are inviting in. And so for me, I'm not going to tell you what news channels to watch or whatever. I would say relatively, I'm probably on the side of being more disconnected from the news. I am very focused on the individual and what we are doing as just like citizens, and what can we do within our individual lives. Because personally, I think that's alongside putting attention into government systems and trying to get cool people in office, whatever. I think the majority of the shift is coming from us. I think in the Western world, we've been conditioned to believe that someone else is going to come and clean all this up, because that's what's always happened. We've been told we're just a cog in the machine, quote unquote. Daddy is going to come take care of all of us, which we project as like government, president, all these systems. And I just don't think that's the case for the time that we're in. I really believe that it is a ground up thing, and this tipping point of collective consciousness and things like this. And so that is very much the call to action that I am bringing. And so if we're asking, what can we do as individuals? Well, let me plant a seed that something that I'm sure everyone listening to this is familiar with, is the idea that you can't pour into someone else's cup from an empty cup. Mm-hmm. It starts with you to an extent, And everyone's heard that. And it's true to an extent. And so if we're talking about what can we do as individuals, we can't not start by talking about attention, the current state of attention and the current state of distraction. It is a world that we are all contending with, and phone addiction, things like this, because really attention is the fundamental resource of our life. If you don't have attentional control, you don't have choice. Because when you're attending to your life, then you start to notice. And it's within the noticing that all of a sudden a choice of action opens up. So you can do this or you can do this. And sorry, not sorry, but we have all grown out of a petri dish of Western culture that is full of dysfunctional patterns. If we all had beautiful upbringings and we still lived in indigenous cultures that have wisdom traditions around child development and what humans actually need to fully develop, completely different story. That's not our story.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there's work to do. Just to say, like, attention is so important. The average 18 to 35-year-old checks their phone 220 times a day. If they're getting 8 hours of sleep, people are checking their phone every 4.5 minutes. And it takes 15 minutes to drop into deep work, which is basically getting anything meaningful done and like really dropping into that zone where you're just like alive in your creation, whatever. You literally can't do that if you're checking 4.5 minutes. So anyway, I see a big part of the problem is that people literally don't have choice over their life right now because their attentional systems are so incredibly broken. Now, I would assume that the people listening to this are maybe a bit on the healthier side of the spectrum, but every single one of us is having to contend with that. And so I think there is a call to action as we are starting to realize more the effects of this stuff, of how we are creating kind of like internal gatekeepers in our life, of saying no to having your phone in this way. Like, there's a new kind of development that's required for life on Earth in 2025 because of all the tendrils of distraction. And I think many of us are playing catch up and just starting to learn how to really implement these ways of being. So that's step one for what can we do. And then from there, I think just the idea that, the idea of like tuning the instrument. And so habits, behavior change, starting to get into your healing work, but really, how can we become someone that is fit for service? And so some people, you know you're calling, you know you're here, what to do. Some of you, though, you don't really know. Maybe that word doesn't even mean much to you, and you've always thought about it, but you just have never felt it. There's a weirdness to that word. So for those people, becoming fit for, I said fit for service, but becoming fit for purpose. And so as you start to orient to tuning up your instrument and what, you're making space for something. You're making space for a seed to come into your garden. I'll say one more thing and then I'll pass it back to you, because there's many different directions we can go, but building on the layers of how to actually be a thriving human in our time. And there's so many things that I'm not saying that go into that. I tend to focus a lot on attention and habits and really cultivating the vehicle of our life, because most of the time we're on autopilot based on our habits. So that's an important piece. But the idea that each of us carries a solution for the time right now, 100%. And that, in my opinion, the greatest solution that you can offer to our society is you living in the pocket of your calling. The call of our time is not for every single person to become social workers and for every single person to spend all of your money donating to, nonprofits. When you are in the pocket of your aliveness and doing the thing that you know you're here to do, I mean, we're talking on the level of frequency at this point. That is the most powerful, potent contribution you can give to this planet, because that is going to ripple also out into everyone that you cross paths with. You're going to naturally be kinder to people. You're naturally going to be more excited and probably want to care for the earth even more. In that sense of aliveness, which again, doesn't have to be something huge and flashy, people feel that, and that is inviting them into that place within themselves. And it's just this ripple effect.
Yeah. Holding a certain frequency that you're mirroring to them, and then people can start even remembering parts of themselves that might have been forgotten in the system that we're currently in. I mean, you talk to so many things with the screens, the distractions, the way society is currently built for us to be a cog in the machine. And so when you talk about fit for service or fit for purpose, what comes up is to get fit, right? To like do your workouts. So how do you get fit for purpose? What are the mechanisms to do that, the routines, the practices?
Well, I think that every single person in their heart of hearts, they were really telling themselves the truth, knows the things that they want to do, they're somehow called to do, and knows the things that they want to stop doing, that they need to cut out of their life. And so go and get a piece of paper and write that list. And part of that list might be reaching out to the friend you haven't talked to in 2 years that ended really sourly, and you've always wanted to call them back and to have that conversation. Part of that list might be cleaning your closet. Part of that list might be letting go of the really dysfunctional habit that you know is taken away from your life. Part of that list might be adding in getting fit, going to the gym and getting ripped. And so starting there is a really approachable way for most people. And what just naturally happens is there's a momentum that starts to churn and move as we start to do those things. And it's hard for someone who's never experienced this, but the example of having that conversation with a friend from 2 years ago, there's this idea called death cookies that comes from this pretty renowned therapist. He has a book. His name's Phil Stutz. And the idea is death cookies. Death cookies are things in our life that we know we want to do or need to do, but we just don't do them. And over time they accumulate and they grow in size through time, almost like a tumor or something like this. But the idea is that when you do those things, when you eat a death cookie, you actually get all of the energy back that was sucked away through time and some, but there's actually some on top. And I can't articulate how powerful this idea is. And so the mantra is eat death cookies. And there's such a surge of energy that starts moving when you really start to knock away things on that list.
Okay, so eating a death cookie is basically taking action on something that was on your to-do list, but you never took action towards. Is that correct?
Yeah. The things you need to do that you haven't been doing. And it can look a million different things. Eating a death cookie might be hitting publish on a post or a piece of your writing or finishing a book. But it also might be going through your files on your computer that have been incredibly messy and disorganized for 5 years that you've just always put off. So it can look many different ways, but I think that's a really succinct, clear way of becoming fit for purpose. Now, there's so many different ways that I can go with this, but I think one of the essential skills that we are being asked to learn in a really fast, distracted, hyper-consumptive culture is learning how to wield our time and energy. And so all of us have finite time and have finite energy in life, but also in a day. And so starting to piece apart, what are you actually doing in a day? Maybe you look at your screen time and you're scrolling for 3 hours a day. Things like this. So starting to curate a lifestyle that is moving in alignment with general well-being, but more than general being, like my approach, don't go online and just look up which habits should I have. For me, it's much more of a listening. And so what are the habits you've been curious about doing? What are the behaviors that you just, for whatever reason, have felt super called to do? That might be watercolor for 20 minutes a day, something like this. But over time, like starting to curate your lifestyle so that when you go to sleep at night, it's like, I know I'm doing what I want to be doing. I know I'm doing what I ought to be doing, what I feel called to be doing. Because the thing is, I almost imagine life has a headquarters somewhere in the ethers. And there's people in the room who are assigning missions, almost like Mission Impossible. And they're like, I'm sending a mission to Nadia to start a podcast, right? But you had the space to do that. And now you're here doing that. And so there's something really important about the idea of having the space to do the thing. And you kind of spoke to this earlier, but life knows the people who are going to do the thing and the people that are not going to do the thing. And it's not that life is judging you. Life's unbiased. It's just this objective rule of like, where there is space, now energy can flow. And so I think for me, the idea of like becoming fit for purpose or fit for service is a two-way street. On the one hand, it is cultivating the deep capacity for listening, for attuning to those little whispers of life. And on the other hand, cultivating the vessel so that when the mission is assigned to you by life, you're actually going to do something about it. I've built some of the skills. I've tuned the instrument. When they hand me the sheet of paper to play the song, I'm going to be able to play it like a master because I've practiced, because I've done scales, things like this. And so there's a very human basic element of the habits, the body, the mind, the skills, competency. And then there's maybe a more spiritual side that is very much the listening, the attuning, your connection with life. And it's all spiritual. It's not one or the other, but yeah, it's kind of the way I see it.
Honestly, Blake, I feel like this was a coaching session for me right now, because as you're mentioning that, I have so many death cookies, and I'm glad you mentioned the podcast.
We all do.
Because it makes me realize that I'm doing something, and yet I have so many ideas. There is a million things in my death cookie jar, and just the idea of even looking at it kind of freaks me out, because I don't even know where to start, especially as a multi-passionate human being like I'm sure you and I both are, and probably many, many of our listeners here. Yeah, I keep saying if I had started learning the guitar a year ago, I could play it now. And I say that every year. And here we are again, coming towards the end of the year. We're recording this in December 25. It's probably not going to, be published until February 26th. Yeah. But here we are. And I once again have not eaten that death cookie of the guitar. And somebody who was volunteering to teach me just sent me a message today, and he's putting a program together, and he's like, I want you to enter that container. And I was like, oh, I don't have time. So I'm going to say yes. It's a 6-week program. Amazing. And I'm just going to say yes. So one little death cookie, hopefully.
Or a big one.
I mean,
sounds like a big one,
huge,
actually.
Right? Music is huge.
Yeah. And that's a really good sign for the listeners, just to say really quick, this example for you and that voice in your head that's like, oh, if I only learned a year ago or something. The things in your life where you have a voice that's similar to what she is saying, those are the death cookies you got to eat, because there is so much life waiting there for you.
My body is so buzzing right now, because it's like, yes, please do this.
Yeah. And there's probably going to be a contraction later. And that's the sign you're doing exactly what you should be doing.
Yeah, it's fascinating. This podcast, while I love all my listeners to listen to this, every single conversation I have is exactly the message I need to hear right now. There were multiple messages already that I received today. So I thank you for that. I have so many more questions for you, and I'm trying to figure out where to go. But you did mention frequency, and I'm really into frequency right now, because I believe holding a frequency is really important. And I'm just curious how you see frequency, what it means, what it is. And just for our listeners, what is frequency and why is it important?
Yeah. Well, what is frequency? Frequency is another word for energy. I feel like you could probably speak to this better than I can, but I think we all resonate with a different way of articulating parts of our reality. And so some people love using the words like frequency. Maybe you're one of these people. And again, there's no right or wrong at all. It's just different words that articulating the same thing. Maybe another way to say it would be like your way of being in the world. And I don't tend to use the word frequency as much. If I was going to describe the frequency that you're holding in your life and how it ripples out to people, I almost think about it as, what's your prayer? What's the prayer that you're holding? And it's like your life is an embodiment of your prayer. And so somehow, if we're able to hold this root system, this why, what's my why, with everything that I'm doing, and we can somehow align with that and actually not just do the thing, but connect to the deeper why of why I'm doing the thing. There's this energy for me of moving in alignment with the intelligence of Gaia. And it's something that you feel. And again, moving to the intelligence of Gaia, it is how you uniquely are moving to the intelligence of Gaia. And we're all going to have a little different style within that dance. And so, the deepest well for me, and maybe I'll actually explain something really quickly. I was in a plant medicine ceremony in Costa Rica, and the medicine was really strong in that moment. And I was connecting to my prayer. And I was like, my prayer, what's my prayer? And was really feeling it strongly. And then I felt almost like an ancient intelligence was knocking on my door. And in that moment that I felt this other presence, it was like my prayer, almost like it was the center of the circle, expanded out an entire another layer into a bigger circle. And that was the prayer. So I went from my prayer to the prayer. And the prayer feels like the prayer of the earth, whatever this intelligence is, whatever you call it, life, God, source, the universe, whatever this intelligence is that we call many different names. It's like it has a prayer, the prayer of life. And as I connected to that and I just stewed in that frequency, it gave birth to my prayer. So my prayer, your prayer, is actually just an expression of the prayer. We all go swim in the ocean of the prayer and we all come out differently. We're all sent out with a different mission, a different way, a different shard of that spark. And I think indigenous cultures, different cultures who have longer lineages of wisdom traditions that have been kept intact, they all know this. In Buddhism, the lineage that I have practiced within, at the end of every practice and setting the intention in the beginning, the intention is to awaken for the benefit of all beings. And that is such an important part, that what we are doing is somehow for the benefit of all beings. And the Lakota people have Aho Metaku Yasin. Aho Metakoye O Yasin is exactly how you say it. And I might be slightly wrong, but it translates to we are all related. So for all my relations, you've probably heard this. And so I think it's just speaking to this really important thing that somehow humans are at our best when we are orienting our lives to being of benefit to a greater whole. This is something I've been spending a lot of time thinking about, because it also, in my experience and what feels true for me, is that living a life that is, and we're not talking about being a martyr. We're not talking about trying to help with an empty cup. I'm talking about in my aliveness, in my calling, my day-to-day existence is somehow being oriented to a greater whole. That also seems to be the most enjoyable individual existence. And so I posted about this on Instagram the other day. If you are a nihilist and you think we're all doomed and there's no way that we can do anything and it's just like YOLO, enjoy the rest of your time on planet Earth, I'm going to have fun. I'm just going to enjoy it. In my opinion, the most fulfilling, fun game to play is one living in alignment with your calling. Now, if you're someone who does think there is maybe a way and has a desire to become a part of the solution, I would argue that the greatest solution you can offer, like you already said, is you living in alignment with your calling. So whether you think we're doomed, you just want to enjoy your existence and there's no way we can do anything, I think the best way to have fun is to live your calling. And isn't it just amazing that that just so happens to be what you would do if you wanted to help as well?
That's so beautiful. Yeah, gosh, if we all could just be in alignment with our calling, wow, what would happen to the world? People keep saying that, oh, if we just all do what we want to do, nothing gets done. And I completely disagree with that. And I keep using the same example over and over again. Somebody once said the bathrooms would never get cleaned. And that is completely not true, because when I'm in a cabin and the bathroom is dirty, I will clean it because I want to be in a clean bathroom. So the bathroom gets cleaned, the kitchen gets cleaned, the food gets cooked, the children are being taken care of.
Really?
Because different people have different passions. And when you come in it from the perspective of in the highest good for all people, it'll really work. But it's a mindset shift. It's an energy. It's a frequency shift that we all, that we go from this me to us. Like, how can we make this better for all of us? And I hope would start shifting and we would get back to ways that more traditional cultures like Native American cultures, African cultures, Asian cultures, old European cultures used to coexist and do life together.
Yeah. I would say also just quickly that the people who say that narrative that, oh, but we can't all just be fun, so we can't all live in our calling or something. Those people are probably running from their calling and they're probably in a lot of resistance to their calling. And no shame, but like when I say living and calling, I'm not saying we're always just rainbows and butterflies, and there's always going to be an element of the suck and where it doesn't feel so pretty all the time. And living your calling is going to be one of the most challenging, probably the most challenging road you ever walk upon and the most fulfilling. So living and calling still looks like doing the dishes, still looks like picking up dog poop on your walk, still looks like cleaning bathrooms, all of the thing. And here's the nuance. Living your calling is not always going to look like being on a stage in front of 1 million people, being a celebrity, being an influencer. Calling on the outside can look very mundane and ordinary. And for other people, their calling probably doesn't look so ordinary and it does look flashy or something. But again, I think we all have almost like a ecological niche, and that is our calling. And when we are in that niche, it's the most fulfilling existence possible to us as individuals. But that looks so many different ways for people. So I think there's such a need for a more nuanced conversation around the different varieties of how calling purpose can look.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I could talk with you for a few more hours, and hopefully we'll have another conversation at a later time, maybe in season 2 of this podcast. We're coming towards the end of this recording, and I want to give our listeners a chance to find you and to share any offerings you might have.
Mm-hmm. My website, which will be in the show notes, but www.blakechalfant.com. My Instagram, I post a lot on there, blake.chalfant. And on my website, I have my offerings. I have an online community. I do coaching work with people one-on-one. And I just started a new podcast. So we'll put that there as well.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And the very last question for you is, if you could go back in time and give a message to a younger version of you, what would you tell him?
You are so much more beautiful than you could ever possibly know. And you should totally believe in yourself and be more confident because you have so much to offer the world.
And so it is. And you have so much to offer the world. And I'm so grateful that our paths have crossed, and for your generous time here and your vulnerability and all the inspiration through what you're doing with your life and how you're helping people. So thank you so much, Blake.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
Thank you so much for tuning into the Wake Up Protocol. If you like what you heard, share this episode with 3 people who need to hear this message. And if you want to go deeper with this work, head to thewakeupprotocol.com and join our email list. That's where this podcast turns into practice. You'll receive tools to help you integrate what you're hearing, bonus resources, and behind-the-scenes insights we only share with our community, along with early access and special invites. If this podcast helps you feel less alone and more like yourself, the newsletter is where we continue the conversation. And if this is the last thing you hear from us, all we'd like to say is keep going, trust yourself, follow your heart. Until next time, have a safe and happy journey.